Well, good evening, folks. I assume you can all see and hear me at this stage.
Yeah.
Yep, very good, very good.
Yes.
Good, good. Right, just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. A couple of things. Can I ask you to all stay unmuted, or to stay muted at least, because there's a lot of feedback coming back from people with mics on and so on. That's the first point. If you would, I've disabled the cross chat in the chat room. In other words, people talking to each other while inside the lecture, for obvious reasons. As I mentioned on Saturday, it was a bit of a distraction. There was a lot of stuff going on, and previously as well, which wasn't related to the actual lecture and so on, and trying to keep track of genuine questions and so on is a bit, as I said, I don't have the luxury of an assistant to be able to check all of this stuff for me. So I'm trying to do this on the fly, so to speak. So as a matter of protocols, also for the, if you do have a question or have something that you'd like to contribute and share, use the reaction buttons down below, and it gives this raised hand. That way I'll directly see it on the screen and I can come back to you. The only proviso is don't forget to take down the action hand or the raised hand when you've finished, otherwise it stays up there and I could end up coming back to you again and so on. This is fairly standard practice anyway. And also I'd just like to say that I got an email on behalf of your class reps, which was nice to see, getting some positive feedback, and from Saturday's lecture, and apparently things went quite well. Well, I had been checking anyway with the two systems to see how things are going. I would say that in terms of swiftly implementing and actioning feedback from the prior class, there wasn't any changes done for Saturday, but the only change that took place was my chair, and other than that, everything else was still standard and so on. So kind of leads us to other conclusions as to what might be going on in terms of receptions and qualities and that and so on. But in any case, let's try and get this show on the road tonight and get out before the snow starts interfering with any kind of transmissions, as it has been prone to do before. Okay, on that point, I'm just going to go down to our lecture room. All right, and out we come. Oh, you still see all of that? Just a couple of thumbs up if you see that clearly enough. Yep, perfect. Excellent stuff. I'll even make it larger to make life a little bit easier for us all. Now, tonight, I'm going to give two lectures, two parts tonight. There are three elements inside in the folder itself on your Moodle page. And again, if there are still people finding difficulty getting around Moodle, go back to the very first lecture, the introduction. It walks you through Moodle and what's where and so on and so forth. On top of that, yes, the three parts. Now, the first one is titled Products and Services. I'm not going to do that. I'll let you look at that stuff yourselves, but we have talked about it quite substantially, and some elements are going to come up again tonight. And the key elements, I moved around some stuff in these slides. So the key elements are going to appear tonight in the second, after the break as such, in the second lecture. But again, I'm going to cover this area, supply chain and the service quality model. And it's for obvious reasons why it's so important, and in terms of understandings and perceptions. And so without hanging around, we'll get straight into it. Just get the cursor here. So now my controller will be laughing. So the service quality, this is what we're going to look at now. And somebody might say, well, hang on a second, we're doing supply chain. And peppered through all of these slides, you will see operations being mentioned and observations. Take that as supply chain. It's essentially one and the same thing today anyway. We amalgamate it all under the umbrella of supply chain and supply chain management. and what the service quality have to do with it. And that'll become even more evident later on. But on a number of occasions, I have mentioned that today it's almost indistinguishable between products and services. There are definitions of what a service, a pure service is, and what a pure product is. You'll see them later on. In any respect, nearly all products have some element of service attached to it, even if it's only a simple installation through to maintenance and warranties and all this sort of stuff. So there are service elements, and these also affect customer and affect the quality and the quality understanding from a customer. So when we look at this, when we look at service quality, there's the differences between the customer's expectations of service and the perceived service. Okay. Now, I've so many times I've gone on record to rant, complain, give out. There are no children online tonight, thankfully. To give out about perception. It's probably one of the dreaded words in the English language, certainly from my perspective anyway, because perception is individual. Everyone has their own understanding of quality and have their own perceptions. And try bottle that is a nightmare. That's why when I talked previously about the likes of grounded theory and all these research methodologies and so on, which you may or may not come across in time, why we have to try in some way group things to get an understanding. And that's really what happens in terms of the quality, in terms of perceptions of quality, for instance, and by way of feedback through customer surveys through marketing department or marketing function and so on. So we try to elicit these perceptions and try to categorize them, and then try and make sense of why these different perceptions exist between male, female, old, young, ethnicity, and so on and so on. We try to categorize and make sense. So we then find, that this particular group, which is slightly larger than the other groups, they have this understanding of quality. Therefore, we better give them what their perception of it is. But this is where the problem arises. So expectations are greater than performance. And always is the case. We in terms of customers or as individuals, we expect more than, and we settle for something that's because we have a perception, we think how it should behave. And that hence customers, and when it doesn't live up to our absolute expectations or doesn't exceed expectations, we become dissatisfied. And that's a dangerous territory for any company to be in, because that level of dissatisfaction can be measurable, but can have some severe impacts on growth, revenue, and so on, obviously. So this is why understanding at least these service gaps, we can do something about them, or the service quality model. Now, before you shout, you may find that there's parts of this are a little bit blurred. It's blurred in the PowerPoint. Oh, actually, I meant to say to you that if anyone is having difficulty seeing the slides, one suggestion would be to open the slides separately and follow down with me. That's only a suggestion. If you have, hang on a second, I'll just take, I have a hand up here. I think it's a hand up anyway.
Yes, Mark, it's me. I was just going to say, would you mind sharing your screen so it's projected a little bigger for us?
It's not going to be much bigger, Emma. You'll only see a fraction of the size of what's there, because it's only regionalized sizing that I do. We don't do full screen sharing. Okay.
Normally we see your screen and you, but I can see everyone on the board tonight.
You can see everyone on the board tonight.
Yeah.
I can see Mark just as one, so I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing just you as a full screen.
Absolutely, I gather so.
If you pin,
look at your settings,
your
Emma.
view
if you
settings.
pin, if you
thank
pin
you.
Emma, if you pin Mark,
Thanks.
yeah, sorted. Earth calling Emma, you sorted?
Yeah, sort of. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Whereas, yeah, as I said, that's as big as you're going to get anyway. There's only that little bit there beside me, and that's not going to make any difference. But I will say there's a slight blurring on the text in the blue boxes, ever so slight, but you should be able to see it as well as I'm seeing it here, at least. Anyway, this is the overview of the service quality model, and as you can see now, it depends on where you look up, where you research the ServQual model. Some places will only show 5 gaps. This is a little bit more comprehensive, showing 7 gaps in the organization. But quite simply, we'll be going through each one of these. So you have the divide between the company and the customer. Okay, and perceived service, expected levels of service, and up here are these are the critical ones that we try to establish some benchmarks or get some insights into by way of surveys, feedbacks, questionnaires, call them what you will, any way of finding out, and listening to word of mouth communication. Despite all our technologies, social media platforms and so on and so forth, fundamentally, this still accounts for almost 80% of marketing in terms of people talking about your product or your services. It's the most communicated source, word of mouth. So whether you're physically meeting somebody or talking to them on your social networks and so on and so forth, still accounts for a phenomenal amount of information spread on. And often this is predicated by past experiences. And usually people have their own opinions, which forms their perceptions and so on. And of course, then we feed all these into what we generally get as an understanding of some kind of expected service level. Now we'll go down through these individually, but fundamentally, this is where excuse me, this is where it all begins. And where companies have the biggest mismatch between services and what they're producing. You remember me mentioning before, back in if you look at the chronological evolution of supply chain, 50s, 60s, 70s, build stuff, pushed everything out, and now we're in a pull situation. This is particularly the reason why, because we're listening more and more precisely to what customers are actually asking us to deliver. And that's why we have this pool. And of course, the other more important points, the cost of production, the cost, the complete cost along the supply chain to be able to reduce overall cost to keep our products profitable, while at the same time giving the high expectations of customers in terms of quality. So moving down, gap 1 is obviously the difference between management perceptions of what customers expect and what the customers really do expect. And you'll see this happening inside, even within the organization. So the management and senior management in organizations believe they understand what the customers are. But in reality, what they're actually doing is reading information second and third hand. They're reading reports from customers, or from marketing, for example, or some talk in the corridor. Generally speaking, formally through reports and looking through some kind of data to form an opinion, to get an understanding of what they think customers are feeling. Again, some organizations are very clever in this approach. Whenever they hire people, they put them working directly through operations, through all their functions before they take up their formal role, whether it's a vice president or a factory operative. It doesn't matter. Some companies, to name one, Toyota, Kawasaki, do the same thing. And fundamentally, they tend to be Eastern-based type companies that go through that. Although that said, I have seen it in 1 or 2 UK companies, again, spending 3 months, 6 months.
Lidl and Aldi do that.
Even closer to our doorstep, exactly. But it makes perfect sense. And I think B&Q also do it as elements of it in part of their retail management processes. In any case, it's intrinsic, so that people get to know and understand the products, the issues that are facing. Back in my day, I spent time down in customer care as a part of an exercise a week, just to get to understand what the poor guys were having, the abuse and so on and so forth that they were getting from customers about this not working, that not working, and so on and so forth, just to get an insight, and then go off and find solutions to say, can we make improvements here and there and so on. That's by way of how I say, reducing the gap. What I'm talking about is ways of reducing these gaps, even though we know they exist. How's my control? In the second gap, the difference between management perception, service quality and specifications, and the standards gap. as a result of inadequate commitment to service quality. So a perception of unfeasibility, inadequate task standardization, and the absence of goal setting. So this is where we're really digging into the internal workings inside the organization as to, what are these standards? What do we have to be compliant to? Are these standards reflective of what the customers are, or are they just a bare minimum, or are they above what customers' expectations are? So getting to grips with the levels of standards, the different impacting agencies that can affect your operations, your supply chain, whatever function you're working in. So standardization and the absence of goal setting. So when we don't set goals to, you hear these, as I say, throwaway comments, exceed customers' expectations, fluffy stuff, as I say, fadism and all that. So, stick a couple of concepts, 2 words together, and you come up with some kind of concept. It's not that straightforward. There has to be thought into. That's why I'm such an advocate of proper processes and setting correct goals to be able to achieve these, and having the processes to support that. And that's what this kind of comes down to as well, knowing what the standards are, what do we need to put in place. In another field of management, you're looking at leadership and understanding how you can pave the way, create the environment for people to be able to achieve goals based on having the right processes in place. The gap 3, the difference between service quality specifications and actual service delivery. So are standards consistently met? Now, these are not just standards about compliance, IEEE standards or ISO standards and all that stuff. That stuff is basic. Standards might be, how quickly is the service delivered, the professionalism of a particular service, the support mechanisms, it could be a simple thing like your frequently asked questions. Those kind of standards, are you consistently meeting, turning around issues? If customers have issues with your product or service, how quickly are you responding to those? Are you doing it consistently? So as a result of role ambiguity and conflict, poor employee job fit and poor technology job fit, blah, 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 inappropriate supervisory control systems, lack of perceived control, and so all of the above, and the lack of teamwork and so on. One of the ways, for example, B&Q get around this lack of teamwork, they have their huddles in the mornings, where they brief each other of relocated products and update their updated handheld devices. So if you have a customer who has a query about a particular product, can't find it, they'll almost walk you down by the hand. Yeah, that's a long way from years and years ago. The guy went off and hid in the stores and said, is Mark on yet? Is it safe to come back out? From those levels to total proactivity, but because they put the process in place and they've taken the time out. And you're walking in onto the shop and you can see these huddles around in the stores themselves. That's how they're getting around some of these issues that are being addressed. Excuse me. And the fourth one here, difference between service delivery and what is communicated externally. So are promises made consistently fulfilled as a result of inadequate horizontal communication and propensity to over-promise? And Dell would be a classic example there in this. Why would they say we'll have your product when you click the buy button and commit to the order, you get an email back or a notification, your product will be with you within 10 working days, for argument's sake. That's the outer level. 99% of the time, that's the outer limit of when it will be worked. So it set your expectation there and then. More often than not, it was coming in maybe 8 days, 7 days, not much below that. You're not going to get it the following day because word of mouth saying, geez, I ordered and I got it within 24 hours. That sets an expectation. So they'll work it within a tolerance level. Only once did Dell fail in, that I'm aware of, that Dell failed in not complying with their promises or not being able to fulfill the delivery promise. And that was the very first of these little notebooks that came out. There were 200-300 euros or some small little thing, about half the size of your laptop and so on. Nice, convenient little piece of equipment. They underestimated the demand. And HP actually nearly beat him to the market in terms of getting the quantities out there to meet customer demands. And Toshiba were also out there at the same time. That was one of the few occasions where, for general purpose machines, Dell kind of misgauged the demand, so they were sending out emails to try and manage customers' expectations for about 2 weeks beyond the delivery dates. But in any case, this is the kind of information we're talking about, dealing over and back.
Just that on that example, that could result in, I suppose, a delighted customer. It is a gap, right? I may say I'll get it to you within 10 days, but I'll get it to you in 4. So yes, I'm missing my published SLAs, but I'm actually delighting the customer at the same time.
You could argue that, but the point I was making there, Colin, is that if I get online and said, hey, look, I got it in 4 days, then it could create an expectation from other customers. Well, he got it within 4 days. Can I get it in 4 days, and so on? So it can put pressure on the system. The reason why I'm saying is that they work in those tolerance levels. It's because they have the data, they collect it, they know what they can commit to, they know what they can actually confidently deliver to customers in terms of whether it's 7 days or maximum 10 days. And that's why they give themselves that, as I call it, the Scotty effect. Your man out of Star Trek, literally the engineer, he always overestimates, and then he's considered to be a genius or a god or whatever, because he comes in ahead of time. And even in one movie, he's asked, why do you do that? Because I'd like to let them think that I'm anyway. But that's the whole point. But now at least we're getting more and more data that we can be almost precise down to the hour of the minute. Probably a bit of an exaggeration, but at least within a couple of hours of when we can actually deliver to a customer. The supply chains have become that tight. And because this is a contributor to competitive advantage, which we'll be coming on to in the second half tonight. So gap 6, the discrepancy between the customer expectations and employees' perceptions. So as a result, the differences in the understandings of consumer expectations by the frontline service providers themselves. And that can be very simple, not listening to the customer, or the customer isn't communicating clearly enough. So having, if necessary, training staff to be able to ask the right questions. Now, unfortunately, a lot of situations where, if you're using call centers and so on, so they're following a script. So there's no room for lateral thinking, follow the script or nothing at all kind of thing. And if it doesn't fall into this, it's hanging there a lot of the time. However, again, and it's almost like trying to be a good psychologist with your consumer, trying to get inside their heads to understand. Bearing in mind that depending on the type of service that you're offering, can you afford to have people engaged on a one-to-one basis for hours, half an hour, quarter of an hour? What are the time slots that you have for a person to be able to get as much information about the customer or from the customer to be able to give them the level of service that they expect or perceived they want in the first place? So it can be, again, having the right frontline staff. Again, your choice of people that are dealing with customers, that becomes critical, because not everyone is suited to dealing with customers. Not everyone can sell. Selling stuff to customers is one of the, I rate it as a very, very difficult task. Some people might say, well, that's easy, because it might come somewhat naturally to them. And all joking aside, the Arthur Daly secondhand car salesman, they're worth their weight in gold, because they can size up customers. They can really get their levels of communication and non-verbal communication are superb, to say the least, because they pick up on signals and so on, and they know whether that person is genuine or not, whether they should waste time or devote more time to making a sale and so on. So anyway, without going on. So in gap 7, discrepancy between employees' perception and management perceptions as a result of differences in the understandings of the customer expectations between the managers and the service providers themselves. So that can come down to things like the actual goal setting and not having proper discussions. You know, it could be down to your appraisal situation, or it could be down to your 360 performance, whatever way you set your goals. That will it's a two-way channel. It's a two-way street. In other words, this is what I'm doing, and these are the goals I agree with my manager, and the manager needs to understand what I'm doing at more detailed level. That's why, for example, Jack Welch talks about HR or HR functions, and I mentioned this before, why HR function is so important, to be able to listen to people and to be able to support your organization, and spending more time in the people management side of things. Just being a manager of the warehouse, or being a manager of in part of the operations, so on and so forth, requires you to have a lot more people interaction, a lot more people understanding, and so on, to be able to set the goals and know where their limitations, people's limitations are or not. But fundamentally, this is what it comes down to in terms of perception by management. So it's also an onus of responsibility for employees to be able to tell management, this is really what's going on here. You know, your understanding is not quite the same as our understanding. Two different realities, call it what you will. But oftentimes it becomes an issue of trying to explain and educate back up to the manager to say, now these are the percent. And again, this comes down to communication, how effectively as an employee you can communicate the various issues, the nuances, and so on of a particular product or service, such that the manager or whomever you're dealing with has a better understanding. And again, training fits into place there. So just in summary, the reasons for the gaps: not knowing what customers expect, the wrong service quality standards, service performance gap itself, promises to do, when promises do not match the actual delivery. That could be time, quality, speed, flexibility, and so on. I'm purposefully changing my style here because they were critical points I just made. Fortunately, I will be coming back to them again later on. But in any case, we're talking about promises or expectations to deliver. Difference between customers' perception and expectations. That's probably a difficult one to try and get to understand, as I said, because of that one bloody word in there, perception. Trying to group them and get a collective feel for the different sets of perceptions based on the different customer types and so on. Then discrepancy between customer expectations and employee perceptions, and then finally the discrepancy between employees' perceptions and management. So these are the 7 gaps. A lot to contend with in any organization, and that's why it becomes important to have the right goals and get really inside the heads of your customers. Customer segmentation, not necessarily as a pure marketing function, but also for your supply chain. And I mentioned this previously, you need to be able to segment your customers as to under whatever category, you know, the high spenders, the low spenders, the frequency spenders, the geographic based segmentation, such that you can deliver your products in a highly flexible, responsive, dependable manner, such that you can get repeat business and so on and so on. So again, you know, every company owner wants to get loyal customers, which add to repeating purchases, and of course, increasing their maximum revenue. Not of course, increasing their maximum revenue. But to get there, they need to know all about the 5 service quality dimensions. And many actually think that service is just a little part of the marketing mix. It's not. It's fundamentally the extended marketing mix. Have just a thumbs up or thumbs down. Have you done marketing? Yeah. Okay. Say 1 or 2 heads nodding. Thanks. So you understand this, the whole point about the 7 Ps, the extended people, physical evidence, and what's the other one? Process. So because products have service elements in them, and elements themselves have some kind of a product or might use some products as part of their service, even though they're not intrinsic to the service itself. What Visa is a service, but you have a physical card. So each of the 5 service quality dimensions makes an extra addition to the level of quality of service which the company offers their customers. So it also makes the service far more unique and satisfying. So how you even package all of this service element to each group of customers or individual customers and so can have a serious positive impact, which generates more revenue as such. So effort into that side of things. So it's again, it takes it out of the perceived marketing functionality in an organization. In other words, it takes when we talk about customers, immediately people can jump to the assumption that that's a marketing function. Absolutely not. Equally as much of it is within the supply chain domain itself, because you're actually delivering the product, for example, and taking back reverse logistics, taking back products, putting out replacements, putting maintenance processes in place, and so on and so forth. So that's tangential to the main marketing function of going out to find consumers and generating new markets and identifying demand and so on and so forth. You have all this other stuff which holds on to customers because it's repeatable. That's the whole point. So the service quality, tangibles, reliability, responsiveness, assurance, and empathy. And just briefly go down. So the appearance of physical facilities, equipment, personnel, and communications material itself. All of these things are sending signals and messages. So what you physically see in a product, the instructions, the way a manual is laid out, the color scheme, all of this stuff, the packaging are anchors for people's qualities perception. These are the tangibles. These are the physical evidence that we talk about in the extended marketing mix. But they're extremely important. How well you heard me mention before Eddie Stover's policy of having their lorries constantly clean, no matter what time of the year it is. The guys went in, spent money cleaning up the lorries. It created a perception the lorries were always immaculate. And it creates this perception that they are caring, they want to have, they take pride in what they're doing, in their own equipment and so on and so forth. Therefore, their service delivery and so on and so forth must be as good as the perception we have of their physical assets, so to speak. And as I say, a clean desk is a sign of a sick mind. Yeah, well, that's totally untrue. It just shows organization and structure and form, and that's important to people. It raises levels of confidence. So ability to perform the promised service dependably and accurately. So doing precisely what you say. So reliability is extremely important. And I think I mentioned to you in the early days of a local plumber above up in Glasson in outside Athlone would only deal with customers within a 50 kilometer radius, because he could get to them. He was dependable. He would be there within an hour and a half from one job to the next. That's service quality. Customers were ringing him from all over the country with problems because he had his particular specialization. I said, I can't get to you. I would be doing you an injustice, turning down money and turning down customers because of that one issue, reliability. I can only get you, and same for my team can only get you. That takes bottle. It just shows that greed doesn't work. Okay, and so reliability, that you can competently and confidently deliver a service accurately and dependably. And again, responsiveness, willingness to help customers and provide prompt service kind of folds into this reliability above up there. They pretty much go hand in hand. Assurance, knowledge and courtesy of employees and their ability to inspire trust and confidence. That's the people element of the extended marketing mix. Having the right people that have the right skills, that understand the product and service, to be able to talk with confidence to customers. That's extremely critical. Again, who you appoint into those positions, and more importantly, the type of training you provide for people, because if you're going into you go into a dentist and you hear a drill going, and it doesn't exactly inspire confidence if you hear someone roaring and screaming inside in the dental room itself, for example. Not that that goes on, but by way of example. Nevertheless, having those kind of facilities in place, just close down those. Empathy, much talked about, and how would I describe this? Absolutely critical, and having a thorough understanding of what empathy is in business. One process that I do this with another cohort of students, and one of the key areas is empathy. When I'm talking about leadership, when I'm talking about product innovation and service innovation and so on, this word keeps coming up. Now here it says caring individualized attention the firm provides its customers. Not that simple. Empathy is getting into their shoes for all intents and purposes. There is a brilliant model or technique that's been around for a number of years. I'm not going to show it to you. I'll tell you about it. If you want material on it, I'll give it to you. But it's called design thinking. And the whole premise of design thinking is that you get out and you try and live the experience of your customer. You try to experience what they're going through to get a deeper understanding. Then you go back in and you start developing your product and your services and coming up with prototypes, because now you've gone through this empathy phase. You've been in their shoes. As so many people who would have said, until you've walked in my shoes, how can you say you understand? And you can't. You really have to. And design thinking methodology, there are several other variants of that. I don't know if some of you may be familiar with the business model canvas. Nearly every company is using this now in the last number of years. Enterprise Ireland are flogging it out the door for the last 6-7 years at least. It's been around since around 2007, 2008, give or take, the first versions of it. So it's all over the place. Everyone has jumped onto it and so on. And in there, in any of the material about business model canvas, they tell you, get out of the building. You would have heard me saying, if you want to understand another market, go there. Don't try and research it from your desk here in Ireland. Go to that physical country, spend time in there. You might have a local agent and all that, but you need to get on a plane and get out there. Well, at the risk of what, €2,000 now next week or so on, so forth, whatever the case may be. Essential business it is. But get out there, get to know your customers, get to know your market and so on. Same for the business model canvas. Get out of the building, go and talk to your customers. You can do so much of this bench work in your office, but the real knowledge is out there with your customers. And this is where this whole concept of empathy becomes extremely important. Get out and feel what others are experiences. That's how you get to know the pain and the gain, what excites customers, all this sort of stuff is only when you've gone out and experienced it, then bring it back in. And you can actually melt this into what we call learning organizations. How efficiently you can communicate what you've experienced in the customer shoes back to your internal organization, such that they have a clear understanding and can then design, develop, and build the products and services that meets precisely those needs. You might say, does it take time? Not necessarily. This isn't a huge exercise, but it just means doing things slightly different. So have a look at that model. As I said, if any of you want that, I have I have some material on it. It's called design thinking, but the whole premise is built around empathy and understanding customers. Not even going to read all those. It's too small for me even on the screen. And but it just talks about those descriptions there. empathy, quality, and so on. Companies should not be expected to give customers individual attention. Reverse code it. Essentially, you need to give them individual attention. You need to treat as many or groups of them as closely as possible. So there's a kind of a subset of what you can and can't do in that descriptor. So again, just to recap on these, the service quality gaps, expected service and perceived service, and external communication to customers, all this area outside, getting to know, that's where physically going out, going through the empathy process to get to understand and get more insights into what your customers. Now, your customers could be the wholesalers down the road. They could be a particular subset or group of retailers in your supply chain. In any case, when you hand over to somebody else, Ishikawa, he's a great man for his quality and the cause and effect diagrams, fishbone diagrams, or whatever to call it. One of his better teachings was inside in a company. Treat your next employee in the process, or the next person in the process after you, as a customer. Back in the day, he used the concept of the photocopier. And now I don't know if somebody would remember going back back then, but when you went to a photocopier, you had to set the number of pages, as you still do today, and the type of paper and the number and so on and so forth. And you ran your put in your original, off you went, 200 copies of A3 diagrams, and off you went. And then somebody else comes along and they needed another 200 of A4 size, and they put in their thing and bang, 200 copies. And what happens? It starts printing A3 size, and they're pressing buttons to try and stop the bloody thing from printing on all these A3 because they want A4 size. His premise was reset the machine to the default. Now, of course, technology is caught up and the thing times out and resets itself today anyway. But it was a very simple and effective example of how you would treat the next person as a customer, have the place right for them. If no, I was going to mention the kitchen and cooking and things like that. I'm not even going to go there. In any case, where this also fits in is into
Men cook too, Mark. You know that.
Sorry.
Men cook too. I hope you know.
I believe so. It's there are some things in life I just can't get my head around, and that's one of them. But you might have come across TQM. Okay, again, a very misused concept. TQM is a philosophy. It's a state of mind in organizations. It's not a methodology. All the other stuff are methodologies, processes, and so on and so forth that support a TQM mindset in an organization. And this is essentially what we're trying to look at here as well. If you want to put a more recognizable brand or name or concept onto empathy and all of this sort of stuff, is TQM, treating customers and having a quality approach to how we do all of this stuff. And trust me, I was never a proponent of quality. At one point in my career, I genuinely dived straight in until the RTFM hit me literally between the two eyes once, to take time out and do things a little bit slower. And then over time, I got a lot faster because I was following more processed. And now that was back in the mid to late 80s and so on. In any case, this whole concept of total quality and TQM, remember, it's a philosophy, a mindset, and that's where an organization should strive. Now, later on, you will be talking about stages in an organization, and this where why it comes up. How are we doing time-wise? We're actually doing fine. The zone of tolerances between, now this is getting a little bit, as I say, splitting hairs, level customers believe can and should be delivered. That's the desired service, and the minimum level of customers. So what's the tolerance level so if I go back to my example there, when they were talking about in that one very rare, as I said, it's the only one I can think of, rare occasion that Dell kind of got a little bit wrong. the desired service was, 2 weeks. Let's assume that. Midways through the second week or towards the beginning of the second week, we were getting emails to say, due to heavy demand and blah, 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 our product, your product is going to be at least another week. They didn't say at least. I mean, that would set the hair standing on the back of your neck. Your product will be another 7 to 9 working days, so on. So they were managing this tolerance level, in other words, the adequate level of service before we as customers became totally annoyed and said, yeah, bloody keep it, give me a refund and so on. So how you can manage that. So knowing and getting an insight as to what the minimum level of customers are willing to accept. And that's only your starting point, getting to understand the minimum level and then move from there and try and always get to beyond the desired. That should be goal setting within an organization. Okay. Don't, in other words, don't aim for the bottom or race to the bottom, to use the expression, move to the top. So we can assess service quality from a customer's perspective, absolutely. Track customers' expectations and perceptions over time and any discrepancies between them. Okay. And that's the key to it, trying to predict behaviors, performances based on the data we're collecting about expectations and perceptions, because they can change, literally can change, like, with the weather. Competition can affect people's perceptions, because if they can have it this that way, why can't we have it this way, and so on. And not understanding the whole process behind what you're delivering to the customer themselves. So that can cause competition, and competition will provoke perceptions from your customers to increase demands and so on and so forth. So it's a mind game. It's a battle in terms of how we hold on to and win customers. So we can compare a set of serve quality scores against those of competitors, which I was just talking about, or best practice examples. So best in what's the expression? Best in class. Personally, I hate that crap. We're the best in class for this. Yeah, show me the numbers. How big is the class? It's like the ads on TV, 78% of people prefer this particular shampoo, and you go and you read the fine print on the screen. 127 people were surveyed. Hardly a representative sample of the population by any stretch of the imagination, but nevertheless, the headlines are out there. It's enough to create, this is interesting, blah, blah, blah. And lastly, because we'll be taking a quicker break than we did last week, or the week before last, we can compare the expectations and perceptions of different customer groups. And this is the whole point of it. Segment your customers and fine tune and continuously fine tune. Just because you've done a segmentation and these particular customers there, and those there, and this and so on, that's not enough. Because, excuse me. Beg your pardon. It's a constantly evolving environment. As I said, for example, you're going to have pressures from competitors, customers changing their minds, perceptions change, word of mouth. So these are constantly evolving or moving targets that you need to be in tune with all the time, and you need to be getting the data in. So if you only measure once a year, you mightn't have those customers within 6 months and so on. So you need to be constantly out there getting feedback and fine tune. That's why we have all these Six Sigma things in place. That's why we have all this Kaizen, continuous improvement, and so on, so on, so on. There's a whole battery of these initiatives running through organizations to get deeper insight, understanding of what's happening out there with our customers, such that we can at least stay in business and supply and make profit and so on. So we can assess the expectations and perceptions of internal customers, e.g. departments or services we deal with. That's easily done. Obviously, it's out externally is where the real fun begins, and getting that information. And of course, it comes at a cost. And how then you want to perhaps use technology to mitigate or reduce any serious investment in. I mean, you're not going to send out an army of people to carry out surveys every 2 weeks. It'll be impractical, but obviously. But what other ways can you, there's a whole battery of mechanisms. Give us a feedback. We'll give you a reduction on your next purchase and all this sort of stuff. So ways of getting, give us a 5 stars, give us this, give us that. Feedback is welcome. Blah blah blah. And in 1 or 2 instances, I get pestered with some emails. Would you like to rate us now? Would you like to rate us now? And all this sort of stuff. It can be a bit annoying. And that can cause angst amongst customers if you overdo it as well. So again, putting the right mechanisms and the right data. That's why I talked about it last Saturday in terms of the metrics, the data and information, knowing what to measure, how to measure it, how frequently or not to measure it, and so on, that it generates valuable information for you to be able to meet the needs of the customers, for example. Okay, folks, it's now 8 minutes to 8 on my clock. Is that so? Yeah. Let's reconvene at 5 minutes past 8. Okay, that gives us about just shy of a quarter of an hour, and I'll do the second lecture. The importance about the second lecture is it covers a lot of topic on the assignment, such as 4 V's and generic performance objectives. Am I speaking loudly enough? You can hear me, yeah? Yeah, so I'll cover those elements in the next lecture. All right, folks, I'm going to stop these recordings and restart them then when I come back in, because the files would be getting too big and we don't want to have that. All right, folks, we'll see you shortly then, all right? At 8 past. Very good, very good. And graphs visible enough, or PowerPoint's visible enough, or are you good enough? Yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect. Happy days, Matty Hayes. God love him. Lord have mercy on him. Anyway, where am I now? Oh, yes. Now, this is the second lecture tonight. And it'll be kind of the pace we're going to be holding for the next few sessions. Because, yeah, we have a lot of ground to cover. There's quite a bit in this, so I'm going to be moving at pace. Suffice it to say that the key elements of your assignment, or one of the case study assignments, is embedded here. The obvious one here is generic performance objectives, and they come up towards the end of it, but we'll start to go down through it. So a lot of this stuff, as I said, is pretty straightforward. So I'll flash through stuff so that we can hit our targets.
Mark, can I just ask you a question before you go on?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just in relation to the ServQual framework, or the ServQual framework. Can I just ask in relation to, is that like a cloud-based system that, based on the 5 domains you spoke about, we'd put in our objectives for empathy within our business, and then we would measure them? Or I got the concept, but I wasn't sure practically how it works, if that makes sense.
They would be generally the processes that you would have in place for at each of those gaps. Does that make sense? You mentioned, Sinead, cloud-based. You lost me there.
Well, no, sorry, because when we were talking about the ServQual framework, let's say, and we were looking at, tangibles, reliability, responsiveness, is it just a framework, or I'm just wondering, has someone developed like an IT system for that me as a company selling chocolate can put in everything I need and measure my quality in relation to what my objectives are?
I'm sure there is software. The one that comes to, but if you're a small shop, you wouldn't be using SAP, for example. They would have these goals and subsets. So in their tree structure, you'd see particular goals, and then they'll start generating reports by pulling all the different parts of data and so on. So you can get, as we call it, metadata from all these, and then group them into those, speed, dependability, and so on. You can group them into those levels and categorize them. This is the whole point I was making on Saturday, for example, defining the metrics. So what do you need to know? What would you like to know in terms of hitting targets and so on? So what do we need to put in place to measure? So don't measure everything, obviously, because that can be costly, a costly exercise and time consuming. So you need to know what metrics do I need to put in place and what's important to the customers. And we kind of delve into that now in these areas. So we take a kind of the serve qual into I loosely say a practical environment when we talk about visibility and performance objectives, because they can differ depending on the industry you're in. That's why we call them generic performance objectives. But there's another very powerful linkage to another model, which I call it's the cornerstones of competitive advantage. So all this starts to kind of come together. But to answer your question directly, I'm sure there is software. I don't know anything other than SAP offhand that you can put in together. But depending on the size of the organization, it could be something that you might just define inside in a spreadsheet. You could take for example, a 360 performance appraisal system that you might have in place and literally change the headings in it. And then where you gather in the data and measure the performance. It's all about actual versus plan. So you could actually take some cost accounting technology or software and say, well, instead of having action budget financial targets, we put in these concepts instead and measure one against the other, and then see what are our tolerance levels and so on within them. So you bring in your quality, upper limits, lower limits, and what's the least likely, or you could use project management software to define the particular objectives and outcomes, and then have your processes in place, again using leveling resources as being the norm in terms of behavior, and then the lower end. So you could take any one of those existing pieces of software and adapt them to one of these pieces of usage, for example. Okay, but
sorry if I interrupted you. No, is it were they more like blind spots? Is that kind of what it was?
That's another good way of describing it. If I use this another example, and from my own past experience, when I was writing software code, we used to hand over data. We had all these programs, and you'd signal another program. We'll process this data, we make some changes, and we'll send the data to you in the form of a signal, like going across a PC bus or whatever, but we call it a signal. And when we were testing this stuff, it wasn't so much the logic of the code. We would test the data coming out of this via the signals going into the next program. And that's these are the kind of bridges. So when you're testing those gaps, that's what you focus on, because you could be getting these processes quite well, but the processes might not be written correctly to deliver the expectations on the other side of the signal, so to speak.
Yeah, okay.
I
I
say-
see it in MPIs, let's say, where maybe
Yeah.
they hand off between R&D and manufacturing.
Eh,
What
eh,
they do.
Exactly, and this was I think I mentioned the example in EMC Squared in Cork, where we looked at the downtimes and non-productive elements of processes, and when we added all these up across all the different products over a period of time, we were able to extrapolate that this could save the company close in 60 million euros per year, and now that's gone back quite a few years, I can tell you. But it's been nearly 10 years now when we did that exercise. But and by doing that exercise, the guy was writing it up and he got his masters out of it. Simple as work-based learning masters.
So to Sinead's question, it's more, I suppose, to help us understand that it's more about not looking at things in isolation, but thinking
Yeah.
about the customer at all stages of any metrics you might have, or
Exactly.
measurements you might have. Yeah.
Exactly, and this is where the whole concept of empathy. And remember, I was talking about, and jokingly in the earlier lecture, I was talking about the where the fuck are we people, and I likened it to an MBA. You have to be able to take the holistic view and then get down and see, does the route match what you're seeing from the helicopter view, so to speak. So and it's only then when you're able to, how quickly, and that can be in an agile approach, how quickly you can get up and down to see these and get an understanding and react, and that's responsiveness, because things are changing and they change so dramatically. And that's how. But you have all the tools to do these things. You know, when I say tools, not directly related to Sinead's point, but you know, all the evaluation tools, you know, Porter's 5 forces, competitive forces, and all this sort of stuff. So we constantly analyze, get the data, and find out about who's out there, who our customers are, power of the buyer, power of the seller, power of the customers, and all that sort of stuff. So we pull all this data together to try and get some understanding of the reality, and not in our own cocooned world of what we think the reality might be. And that's why we need to get out and understand. So what's important to the customer? Is it the taste of the chocolate, or how quickly it's made, or is it the wrapping of the chocolate, or is the brand name, and so on and so forth? You know, these are all what's important to the customer. You know, I mean, you can buy some chocolate that might be nicely wrapped and all that sort of stuff, but tastes like eating straw. But nevertheless, we convince ourselves, oh, this is a brand and this is lovely stuff. That's the taste that's supposed to. But in reality, emperor's no clothes. But it's not. It tastes rubbish, and so on. You see my point? Trying to get understand the customer. I hope I've addressed it in some way. So, you know, be flexible. Look at different ways of trying to gather and understand what the customer is looking for in terms of service quality. It's only a model. They're the conception, but they're recognized as the generic gaps. Some gaps will be far more severe than others, and some gaps mightn't even really exist in your organization, whereas and other elements most certainly will. You can be quite sure, company to customer, that gap will always exist, and it's how you get that information to try and close that gap and get to understand and put the mechanisms in place, or processes, or some way of collecting information from your customers to give them what they want. Okay, folks, I'm going to move swiftly on this. Again, throwaway slide. Just talking about operations and how important it is inside an organizations and corporate strategy, you know, and the amount of money spent on consultancies in all of these areas. When we look at the services market, you know, percentage of world revenues of 40 firms. So world revenues percentage in consultancy, 31% is spent on operations and management, and so on, so on. IT 17, and so on. It just gives you an idea of the richness of and monies that the likes of McKinley and McKinsey, Grant Thornton, PwC, so on and so forth, where they're making their monies. Another kind of simplified slide, the back office of your bank, it's an operations function. Your body shop is an operations function, and so on. Takeout restaurant, even though it's a service, it has back end operations, and so on, so on. All part of your supply chain. This one, even if you can read it, fair play to you, because I'm sitting right in front of it and I find it difficult to read. It's only when you have it out on a big screen beside you. But this is a concoction of models that I pulled together myself a number of years ago. The bottom one in green is known as Porter's value chain. It's extremely powerful because raw materials come in at this end, inputs. You do something, you transform them, you do something with it, and you send products out here. And marketing and sales try to find a market, and then you have a service element. And when you put all these costs together, you're adding value to a piece of metal, aluminium, came in on a roll, and it goes out here as an Audi A6. So you've added value to the lump of metal that came in the door. That's essentially what this describes. And then you add a little bit of profit onto it, and that's your selling price for the product out there. So we track everything right down to the individual components and processes and so on in the larger organizations. This model up here does come up very shortly, but this is the key one I'm talking about, the four cornerstones of competitive advantage. And you've already done strategy, so corporate strategy impacts the whole parts of the organization, and then you will have operational strategies and planning at the more granular level. That's all this is. So it's a combination of a couple of strategic management plus operations, supply chain management running across here through your value chain, and then pull all these together and find out which of these four, or combination of four cornerstones, do we work to excel in. Sounds a little bit cryptic at the moment, stick with it. So the best way to understand the operation, everything you see around you, even except on you, except the blood and flesh and so on and so forth, are processed by some kind of an operation. Everything we did, no matter what you're looking at, your PC that you're looking at there in front of you, all of this stuff, something was done. And and jumping past this one because I want to get to a particular, well, before I get to that particular side, important words in italics up here. Where does the firm get its competitive advantage? And we look at the product service technology that we're offering to meet the customer's needs, marketing, finding the right market for the right product, the right price, the right place, so on, so on, so on, right quality and that. And operations then producing to meet those demands that marketing identify. And that kind of triumvirate is essentially what keeps us running, coming up with new product versions, new add-ons, new features, our product roadmap for all intents and purposes in this case. So these have to work very closely together. And unfortunately, traditionally, marketing and operations are always at loggerheads. And I've said this to you before, whereas, you know, the more mature organizations see that they need to work very closely together. And that way it feels there's far less wastage, which is a quality issue. Here's the diagram I want to get to. In here you see these these guys wrote it back in 2001, literally 20 years ago. It's as valid today and will be for the foreseeable future as it was when it was written, and it's much under it doesn't get as much airplay as it should do. There are several other authors would have written stuff beforehand, but all nicely synopsized here. What is the holy grail of organizations? Is to find a competitive advantage. What's your USP, your value proposition, whatever the hell it is that makes you better than your competitors? Now, the four cornerstones, they've identified superior quality, all the gaps filled, for example, and better quality than your competitors. Efficiency, operations, responsiveness, responding to customers, and innovation, the technologies you're using, the processes, the way you're doing things. Remember, innovation and creativity, they're actually the wrong way around. It's creativity and innovation. Creativity is the spark of genius that comes up. Here's the idea. This is a new product idea. Bang. Innovation is the way you convert that idea into something. Okay? So it's no longer a chicken and egg concept and argument and debate. Creativity, innovation, how we do it. And that's all the processes, superior processes in an organization or any part of an organization. So in any case, any one of these or a combination of these can lead to a competitive advantage through either low cost. If you're doing things more efficiently, you have less waste, therefore your unit price, your unit cost goes down. If you're doing it, if you're constantly advancing the way you're doing things, improving processes, continuous process improvement, Kaizen, all that sort of stuff, you're contributing to lower cost. And that's what can differentiate you from your competitors. So you can either go one or the other. It's rare that you will actually have both low cost and differentiation. A Ferrari wouldn't be considered to be low cost, but it's a differentiated market. Same as Porsche or any of these other, because you're going for a particular niche market. It's a different type of, but mass production, you'd be generally speaking going for low cost. That's not cheap, as we say to you. I mean, it's almost becoming difficult to use the word cheap in sentences now because we've been more and more conditioned to think that it's of poor quality because it's cheap. Not necessarily, but you get my point. When we're trying to drive costs down and drive to do things more efficiently, there's one word missing in front of those, and being the generous person that I am, some may not agree with that, I will give 15% straight off the bat if they can tell me what the word is. Put your hand up first, though. If you raise your hand and then tell me the answer, that's the. If you can tell me what one word is missing. Sinead's hand is up. Yeah, far away, Sinead.
There's only a guess now, Mark. Unique superior quality, unique superior efficiency.
No.
Sustainable, is it?
Who's that?
Sustainable.
That Paul, is it?
Yeah.
Is that Paul Crimmon, is it?
Yeah.
Fair play, Paul. You've just earned yourself 15%.
Woo!
As I say, I do these wild things every so often. But that's the word. The three words. Etch them into your memory. 15% worth of your memory. And then I need
I'll
to.
never forget it now, Mark. Don't worry.
Yeah. What I'd ask you to do, Paul, was just pop me off an email with your student number in, or it'll be in the email, so as I can have a record and I'll remember to include these things. But sustainable competitive advantage is what I'm after, and that sustainability can be anything. It can be quality, and that could then become responsiveness. So it moves around. The spotlight can move around and focus on different areas. But as long as you have something that keeps you ahead and you can sustain that leadership or advantage, then happy days, you're going to get more revenues and more customers. That's no matter what, all your business books should be, if not already telling you, competitive advantage. You need to have sustainability in front of it. You need to keep it going. Yeah, I have too much to cover tonight, so I won't. I'll avoid the stories. I'm not going to go through this one in all the details. Suffice it to say that this is just a brief history of Kmart versus Walmart and how they started in 1962, the number of stores they had, the total revenues, and the bottom line, the synopsis, and at the end of all of this was Kmart wanted to grow and improve their sales, and they said, let's merchandise, get on TV, market, and all this sort of stuff. Walmart, on the other side, they invested in technology, efficiency. They improved innovations and efficiencies. That's how they ended up. You'll see it year ending 96. Walmart sales were 93 million. Compared to the previous year, Kmart's 25 billion, Walmart 15 billion. A couple of years later, 93 versus 34. Total swing around 3 times as much. And it says that they're it invested millions in its operations to lower costs. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was FedEx did the same thing in the delivery service by using technology and all that sort of stuff, and track and trace and so on. They were one of the first to implement that type of technology. But it just goes to show how, by focusing in the right areas, having the right goal set inside an organization, that you can be extremely effective. And that's just one example of it. Come on, get out of here now. I don't need to kill all that. Kmart's employees lacked skills needed to plan and control inventory. So they weren't even upskilling their own staff, to use that horrendous freaking word. And Walmart increased from 20.1% to 41% of the market share, and still going strong. Fast forward 2004, Kmart appears to have adopted, and that strategy didn't work. That tried to merge with Sears Roebuck and company and so on. So Sears pulled out from memory because they thought Kmart was cheap compared to Sears perception and brand and so on. So it didn't go ahead. Potential synergies between the convenient location stores, and that was they were trying to leverage off the brand name of Sears and so on. Anyway, it didn't work out. So diversity and so improvements in operations resulting in lower costs and improved customer satisfaction. Obviously, if they're passed on, and that's the whole point about it, is you know, you don't necessarily pass on all your savings. I mean, the whole idea is to make profit, but it puts you in a far better bargaining position and better control. Reduce your debt equity ratio because you're getting more revenues in, more profitability. Therefore, you become more, and you can diversify and then move on and create more product for customers and so on. And that kind of comes up later on. Improving operations depending on advances in technology. That's a given. And competitive advantage by improving operations. So can obtain, I wouldn't even say can, will obtain competitive advantage by improving operations, whether it is, customer facing operations or processes, whether it's in the nuts and bolts of your actual manufacturing plant itself, improving processes there. If it's in improving the ordering process, when we look at these generic performance objectives, if you're improving any one of those, they can give you a competitive advantage. So analyzing and developing your strategy for supply chain. So diversity of operations. So here's just a simple example from Swatch. As you can see, they're pulled together. They looked at the product and what was unique. Saw competition coming in from Japanese and Swiss against all the perception of them being the cuckoo clock land and fabulous watches, mechanical watches and so on. Decided, let's get into this and fend off and defend some part of the European market against particularly the Japanese initially on what was it, LCD watches and all that sort of stuff. Hence the Swatch. And then let's focus it on fashion. Try and distinguish it, differentiate it in some shape or form. So we all remember the original Swatch watches, change the band, this, that, and the other thing. So if you look at it here, they link together. So innovative plastic design with few moving parts. Well, there was no moving parts. Allows mass fashion orientation, but also standardized productions, which funds further innovations, which gives extended ranges because of high volume, increases variety, does not increase costs, and so on, which funds. So as you can see, it's a spiral getting bigger and bigger. Some of Swatch watches today you would hardly recognize. But what else did Swatch, does anyone get involved in terms of diversity?
Cars.
There's a
That-
car, yeah, a smart car.
You did, yeah, you're spot on. I was just about to say, no, you'll kill me if I say that. Yes, smart
More
cars.
15%, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Put me down, I call out my student number there for you.
Good one, good one. I was actually, look, in fairness, I'll follow through. I follow through my thread. I was going to say 5%, but yeah, send me it on, Michael. Yeah, go on. 5% is better than nothing at this hour tonight.
Absolutely.
Dermot got in first.
Huh?
Dermot
I
was
got
the
in
first
before
one.
him.
Yeah.
Oh
I have
yeah.
that now.
Okay, I'll be fair. I'll give you both 5%. How's that?
Just 30.
Lucky for you, Dermot, it's recorded.
I know.
It is actually. Yeah. So happy days. Anyway, where was it? Yeah, Swatch, Swiss Mercedes art, and the concept of the Swatch watch. You know the story with them and so on and so forth, and they're still producing them today. So anyway, core function. This is just another way of representing the Porter's value chain that I showed you earlier on with the primary activities and the supporting activities. So you see a lot of this kind of repeating itself coming through in these slides, but it gives you an idea. The support service, literally just another way of representing the same concept. Again, the position of operations functions, and so they're using these a few examples over along here. A church, fast food restaurant. So process perspective, identify the needs. That's marketing. Accounting, raise the finance, create the budget. Divvy out the profitability to fund projects, and then develop, produce, manufacture, transform, whatever you have to do with the product, and then make and distribute it. Your operations. So a product development identifies the product, and then you go off and make it and get it out the door. And okay, church, call on newcomers, manage appeals, retranslate the scriptures, and then conduct weddings, bar mitzvahs, funerals, and baptisms. Anyway. So the best way to start understanding operations, everything we do about us, see around us, things that are done, services we consume today, radio stations, bus services, and lectures, etc., also have been produced by an operation. So the sequence of things that we went through. So operations manager create everything that we buy and sell in companies. This diagram, the start of again, one of my favorite diagrams, because it's so freaking simple. Input, transform, output. You've heard me say it before. We'll start looking at a slightly more advanced version. So anything that goes in, you have people, you have resources, you have machines, you have materials, supplies, all inputs. We do something with it and we end up with goods and services. This is the slightly more advanced version of the same thing, nicer graph even. The key points inside here, I'll use this cursor to show you, are these. Feedback loops. So you build something in your organization, you sell it out, you send it out to distributors, to retailers, directly to customers, you get feedback. The most directly feedback is they buy it, and they buy it at the rate you're producing it, or there's more demand for what you were actually producing. Simple feedback. In other words, get information. This is the empathy. Find out what's going on. Get information back from your customers. And likewise here, you will have your SLAs, you'll have your various standards that you'll expect from your suppliers feeding you the inputs, and you get the feedback there. You're timely, you deliver stuff on time, it's of highly usable quality, and so on, so on, so on. You're feeding that back. And then you have total feedback here. It looks a little bit unusual insofar as that you're thinking that these are your customers feeding back to your suppliers. But technically it's going through you. This is why we have the IT systems, linking the systems, the likes of SAPs and so on, so from EPOS, point of sales, all the way back to your suppliers, their suppliers, and so on, for all the different chain of transformation processes. Each has an input. That's why the bridge or the gap concept, or the signal concept, you do something, you move it along, something else is done, you move it along the supply chain. The important thing is that look at it as a system and a closed loop. And I talked about these before, systems thinking approach. It's a whole methodology. It's a whole concept in itself, systems thinking. But this is really what you're looking at. When you strip all the concepts, the wordage, the overwhelming stuff about it, it comes down to simply this: input, transform, output. Give me feedback, improve it. More feedback, improve it again. Change, Kaizen, continuous improvement. Again, the same thing. Operations concerned with producing and delivering products and services. Just another version of the same thing, using a TV production company. So it talks about the different steps in, so that if that's the transformation process, there's 5 sub processes going on inside. You have sales and marketing doing something, you have the engineering department and IT doing something, and you have sets and pros, props manufacturers and so on. So different subsets within the same process. And if you wanted to be absolutely critical about it, you could say, well, what's on the critical path? What do we need to do first and then do last, and so on, and what's asynchronous, synchronous, and so on. But there's a logic. So unless you have the scripts and you have the play or the objective first, then you know what you want to produce the right sets, and then what you want, and then who you're going to market it to, and then what technology do you need to be able to produce this, and so on. So you get the sequence in order. 3 or 4 core functions of it: designers design software, produce effective new products and services, and appropriate designs promised, and so on. Again, just another, as I said, a variation of the same stuff that we talked about earlier. Here's another. We're moving into the realms of the visibilities and performance objectives now, and this is just the continuum. Particularly this line here is the continuum. And unfortunately, it's become more and more blurred between pure goods and pure services. And the pure goods here, they talk about crude oil production. It's a pure good as such. But now you will have service elements to this, and in terms of the outlets themselves. If you're like Shell or BP and you own the whole supply chain from start to finish, you'll have service elements inside there. But technically, the pure crude oil production before it goes to be treated is a pure good. And here's the differentiators, as we call it, and the last one here, quality is evident, as opposed to down here, if you're getting psychotherapy clinic, so on and so forth, quality is difficult to judge. This is where the perceptions really get off the scale altogether. So what one person might think is brilliant, the next person might think is a total whack job altogether, But in any case, it varies, and when you begin to get into the services, it does become more and more difficult to pin down the quality versus this. That's why we use this extended P's, evidence-based tangibles to justify our understanding of perceptions of quality, high customer contact, and so on and so on. But as I said, nearly all of this line has become blurred because there are service elements to virtually all products nowadays. And now, here you have it. So a topology of operations. Which side of each of those 4 horizontals are you going to fall into? Low volume, high volume. So if you look at low volume, you have low repetition. Each staff member performs more of the job, and less systemization. So high unit cost. That could be a cabinet maker's firm, for example. So you would have low volume, or kitchen makers, for example. But if you go to the other end of the scale, you could have your kitchens from B&Q or IKEA and so on and so forth. So you would have high volume. So there's a lot of repeatability and so on. So customizations don't really happen to a point. Well, they're pretty much off the shelf, most of the stuff. Specialization systems and low unit cost. Why? Because of volume. You're spreading the unit cost. That's why getting something done by a bespoke kitchen manufacturer will cost you an arm and a leg versus something that you'll get from a non-bespoke kitchen maker. You're spreading the unit cost. Variety, flexible in terms of high, it's flexible, complex, match the customer's needs, and has high unit cost. So you're getting, it's taking you longer. The variety is high because you have so many unique versions of something. The other end of the scale. So if you're looking at high-end cars, they're highly customizable in terms of, down to, do you want, purple leather with yellow spots and things like that on it. And trust me, you do have some nutcases that do like that sort of stuff. There was a company down in Waterford. Do you remember they made these ranges, fire ranges, and there was another company that converted them later on years into oil burning ranges, the solid fuel ranges. Oh, geez, they're just at the bridge as you're going into Waterford, the foundry down on.
Stanley.
Did somebody say the name?
Stanley.
The very ones, and the Stanleys, and there was actually this company then that took over, or later on started to produce the oil burning versions of them, converting them to, and they used to re-enamel them for people. And there was one lady, procurer setup, did want pink with yellow splashes on the thing, just by, here's a useless piece of information. Don't anyone say like the rest of it.
It wasn't your wife, was it?
Which one, first or second? Anyway,
I'd say
Where
that
was
was the first one.
jeez, no, God, not going there. Anyway, so you have variety, and in terms of mass-produced stuff, you don't have a lot of variety for obvious reasons. It's all mass-produced, and then we move down to variation in demand, high demand, low demand, and visibility. So let's take it one step. I ignore this one because, okay, I don't want to ignore it. All this does is shows the interactions between and the kind of information flow or requirements or between core operations and the different functions here. And if you look at for example, accounting, so operations provides, as I say, relevant data, number of units produced, hours worked, machine hours, man hours worked, and so on and so forth. Finance take all this in and bang, to push out your budget, your cost reports, your monthly reports, weekly reports. So they put the figures to the numbers, and that feeds back into operations, so they can see whether they're on budget, whether one performance process is performing according to plan or not, based on the finances and so on. So the same thing here. Human resources, operations looks for the type of person, the person's specification, the skill sets required, and so on and so forth, and HR helps recruit and train and so on back into operations. So that's all it does. It shows the dependencies between the different functions. Most of this is a lot of times is automated. However, in organizations, depending on at what phase or state I would say the process is at, different functions take priority or take higher priority in the organization. So if we look here, in the first instance, preparing quotations. So who is heavily involved? Marketing and, of course, finance and costing. So they're going to produce the numbers. And if you look at the program production, now this is based on this TV production company example earlier on, and program production, it's the production units, the core operations, they take the bulk of resources and operations. And then promotional and advertising again falls into production. And as we move down, technical support becomes less of an issue. It's not so important because everything else should be going according to plan, so to speak. And then the music videos, again, production units. So you can see this. It's as I say, the size of these circles are relative to the priorities or use of resources at any as the project moves on. Another way of looking at this is your project plan, your accumulated project plan, the S curve. So the bulk of all the work is done. That's why the plan moves so steeply in the execution phase, then tails off towards the end. That's just another way of talking about the same thing, and I'm moving on. So, by way of example, if you think about these, volume. Now, I slightly changed the names from what's in the original slides. There's not a lot, but just to make it more recognizable. Jury's Inn type hotel versus an island resort hotel. Island resort hotel might be some of these fantastic looking places you'd see maybe down in the Maldives. Up on stilts, different houses or different kind of rooms, setups. Each one is unique and so on. But they all exist. So if you look in terms of volume, very low, but extremely costly. Whereas in terms of volume of Jury's Inn, it's quite high. Variety in the resort is very high. They're all different, low in the likes of Jury's. So, and variations similarly in terms of demand, it would be variation in demand. To say that it's high would be quite simply because the how would you say, maybe there's a queuing list, maybe they're sought after destinations and so on. So the demand could be high, but variation is extremely high in terms of the customer experience. In Jury's Inn, they're low because the rooms are essentially the same. If it's a 2-bedroom, all 2 bedrooms look essentially the same. And then visibility, high visibility and low visibility in terms of the what was I thinking of there? Yeah, I'll come back to it. There's something thinking, but so in any case, we have to have trade-offs. You can't have all, so you will have to trade off volume versus variety. For example, the most obvious one there: responsiveness versus efficiency. Okay. Is it possible to have both? You might have close, you might have 49-51, but generally speaking, what's most important to how quickly we get to a customer in terms of responsiveness, or how quickly we are, or the efficiency at which we produce something and eventually deliver to a customer or solve a customer's problem. You follow me? Yeah, assuming so. So, and then down here, production costs versus supply chain costs. So that's not I'm at odds with that versus situation, production costs versus supply chain costs, because it would infer that they're trying to take out the pure operations cost and look at all the others, the logistics, inbound, outbound logistics, and all that sort of stuff, transportation costs as separate trade-off one against the other. Doesn't make sense because operations is integral to the complete chain as such. So I'd be a bit I'd be wary of that one. Let's just put it that way. In-house make or versus outsource. Well, that's a clear trade-off there in terms of now. And the one prerequisite there is that, and word of advice: never outsource core competencies. Never outsource some of your IP or your patented stuff and so on and so forth. So be very careful what you outsource. Now, traditionally, you would have outsourced maybe HR functions, finance, some sales and marketing. Maybe you might outsource those, but you certainly wouldn't outsource your core manufacturing or a particular part of your manufacturing. You might not outsource for copyright because you give them away. You throw out the baby with the bathwater as well, because competitors will find out. This is notorious. Last night I was looking up a particular bike being manufactured in Italy. I think it's Cinelli was the brand name, And the article I was reading about was this is remarkably like the Atom bike that's made in Belgium. And as I was reading down through the article, I stumbled across something which kind of it didn't surprise me, but what they called it was open mold production. And it's essentially the molds can be used for different manufacturers or different retailers. So in these particular instances, a number of bikes have very, very similar geometries. It's just that they might use slightly different carbon fiber in these cases and different components for the completely assembled bike itself, but the core frame was being made. I just thought it was interesting in so far as, and then you're paying ridiculous prices based on names and brands and so on. So making
That would be somewhat similar in the car industry, where you're seeing
Yeah.
like some of the engineering used within the cars, the same BMW, Mini, things like that. But then the outside of it all is, and the interior finishes is where it's premium versus
well,
gold standard.
you can do in a manner of speaking, yes, you can do have you can have a lot of similarities. I mean, some of the engines, I mean, even in your mobile phones, the biggest supplier of your technology in your mobile phones, the screens at least, would be LG, and they supply a number of other big brand names as such. So because but that's their competency, they're good at that stuff, even though they make their own products themselves. So what are you know, why reinvent the wheel? And this is the whole point about supply chain management. Don't, you remember me saying, don't build up your own transportation systems, because you're not going to be good at it. Use people, you outsource it and so on, but you keep and stick to your core competencies, those processes that you are particularly good at, and get better at them, and then all the rest literally falls into place around it. Again, just another variation of the same diagram: operations strategy into design, planning, control, then improvements, and then we go to output. So you have an overall strategy, and the design could be a product roadmap. You could have the next iteration of the products, and you go in and you put your projects into place, or processes and production lines into place, and so on. And then you look for improvements. Well, what are we going to do for the next iteration? Or are we going to focus on one of the four cornerstones? We need to improve our innovation. We want to get better at doing what we're already doing, and become a market leader, or when I say market leader, an industry leader in terms of the way you're using technology and processes to manufacture your products. And that's all operations management. So operations competitive role and positioning, and then operations strategic objectives over time. Improve your quality, improve your efficiency. It could be a 24-month, 5-year, 10-year to stay in business, and so on. Have a good product map. That's your strategy. And passing through this same concept again, just feedback loops. Another way of representing that concept of feedbacks from input, transform, output. And we need to plan. We need to be able to measure and put metrics in place and put the process in place that we can plan and evaluate actual against planned performances. And then when we see any deviations, that's where we start to put in improvements. How can we do it better? That's why I mentioned reflective practice. What did we do previously, and how can we improve on the way we did what we did previously? That's improvement. So we assess and evaluate the data. So in terms of strategic role of operations, be dependable, operationalize strategy and practicalities, to explain practicality. So how we take the higher ordinate goals and objectives of the organization and cascade them down into day-to-day operations. That's how we implement stuff. Support in an appropriate and understand contributed decisions, and then striving. So the key attributes of operations: implement, support, and drive. That comes with levels, because usually the starting point in operations, if you go back to the origins of any of your companies, there will be chaos. It's default. There's lack of form, structure, and so on and so forth. And operations can be a pure quagmire in the early days of a setup and so on and so forth. But as time moves on, you become more proficient at doing, and that's the whole point. Continuous improvement. The better you get at it, you come from this chaotic state to being the core driver within inside your organization, within the overall organization. And this is what we talk about here when we look at these stages. So ability to implement, then the ability to support strategy, and then the ability to drive strategy. So they're the differences or the moves between each of these 4 stages. So in the first instance, as I said, chaos, everything has gone pear-shaped or is pear-shaped inside. There's total pandemonium to become as good as your competitors, then clearly the best in the industry, and then redefining the industry's expectations and so on. One company that you could classify into that area in terms of being externally supportive and at that level of defining the industry's expectations, you could say Apple was. You probably could throw Samsung in there, but most likely not. Apple would definitely have redefined the industry expectations from a communications device to an entertainment and fitness device, as it's moving towards. Certainly the entertainment, the fitness is already coming in on stream and so on and so on. Audi, in terms of its call it space frame technology. What the hell is space frame technology in Audi? It's the total use of aluminium for the chassis and the way they constructed the chassis and so on, and hence they're totally biodegradable or reusable. All the parts can be melted down to a number of times. I don't know whether it's 5 or 7 or something like that before the metal becomes totally fatigued, that they can't be reconstituted again, because you have to add other alloys to pure aluminium to make it strong and so on. But anyway, there's space frame technology and the way they construct it and the crumple zones and so on. So that was their competitive advantage. As far as I'm aware, there's no other company, car manufacturer, using that same technology, because these guys patented it. They closed the shop down on it. Fair play to them. So give operations, given operations an advantage. So these are the levels of, how to say, maturity. I'm trying to think of the name of the guys or the model that they use for evaluating the maturity of an organization. It's not capability maturity modeling, but there's another 2-barrel name or something like that with it. This is just rehashing the previous information. How am I doing time-wise? I need to move fast. Another way of representing the external forces on your organization or on your transformation process. Suppliers, Porter's 5 forces: customers, suppliers, and of course here they're talking about shareholders, employees, continuous employee, fair pay, and all these things can impact on your on your core operations ultimately. Therefore you have to take them in. So these 5 words down along the right hand side, these are your generic performance objectives. Okay. Quality, speed, dependability, flexibility, and cost. Quality being right, and that includes all the R's, 7 of them. Right product, right place, right time, right quality, right customer, right something or other. Can't remember them all. Getting late at night, I'm up since 6 o'clock. My memory is shot. Doesn't matter. But all getting things right, quality in totality. Speed, how fast you can do it. Dependability, being on time. That means not late, and a lot of times not early. There's no point in a painter coming down to paint your house, arriving here at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you don't normally get up till 7 o'clock. Is that dependability? No, that's a real pain in the butt. Someone ringing the bell, wanting to get in, and you're still in bed. Flexibility, being able to change, adapt. Hence all these concepts and systems and processes of agility. How quickly we can adapt to changes and responsiveness to changes. And of course costs, being productive, innovation, superior quality, and so on, all of the 4. So any one of those 4 cornerstones can support these 5 generic strategy performance objectives. Bear in mind they're generic. They're generally what industries, they can change depending on the industry you're in. You can define your own performance. You might only have 4 of them, but to give you an idea of why and how these interact and work. So being able to do things right, quality advantage, enables to do things on time, dependability, enables things to be done quickly, speed, enables you to change what you do, flexibility advantage, and finally, which enables you to do things cheaply, cost advantage. So putting those sequences in place, and they generally like to follow that sequence in terms of quality, dependability, speed, flexibility, and advantages. Some you might look at and say, well, we could run some of them asynchronously, maybe, but if you bite off more than you can chew, you're going to be in trouble. So having a clear goal, which do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on speed? What's important to customers, more importantly? Well, obviously cost would be a big one, and quality. So they will probably take prioritization. But we can see where, and again, it will depend on the industry you're in. So the benefits of excelling. So minimum price is highest value. So in terms of cost, maximum cost, maximum value. So if you minimum cost, maximum value. So the more you drive down through superior innovation, you're driving down and improving the way you're doing things. Therefore, the unit cost of production goes down. You're getting more product for less effort, so to speak. From your economics terms, the marginal utility, and so on. But there comes a point where it doesn't become viable. Dependability, dependable delivery. You have to have reliable operations. So the system has to be going, and your processes have to be on bang on order, such that you can rely on delivery of your products. So products in to raw materials into products out, efficiency. That's what will give you the dependability, flexibility, adaptability to change. So what happens, you know, as I say, frequent new products, maximize the choice or maximum choice for customers. But having a roadmap, it doesn't mean necessarily, there's nothing worse than coming out with new products, you know, too frequently, because that really annoys customers. So getting the pace and time and adaptability of the consumer and taking that into account. So are they ready for the next model? Have we saturated the current market, and then do we move on? Because markets will change in different parts of the world and so on. So this market might be saturated, another market might be only emerging. Point in case, why Dell moved from Europe, Western Europe towards Eastern Europe. Western Europe was becoming saturated with PCs. Eastern Europe was becoming a newer market. Why? Because broadband was being rolled out in Eastern European countries and Russia and so on. So it changed. The best way of describing it, you know that game whack-a-mole. It comes up here and you hit them there and so on. Same idea. Quality, error-free production services, and then quick delivery, speed. So let's try and put these, okay, we'll do the right thing. This is just another variation of the previous diagram. Quality, again, preventing errors, slowing down throughput, you know, so improved efficiencies, improved processes, pulling in the data and reducing any of the errors. And remember, quality is anything that can be considered to be a waste inside an organization. Downtime, the wrong processes, taking too long to do something, order time, delivery times, any of these things can be a waste if they're not done efficiently, or if there's room for improvement and you don't take advantage of those improvements. Prevents errors in internal unreliability and low dependability. So if there's faults, you know, if there products moving from one process to the next, it could be the floor layout, for example, that leaves the product prone to damage, or it could be lack of security, because you might have high value components in there that are prone to pilferage, for example. And it does go on inside an organizations and so on. So any of the and so components, you know, so you have to be careful, as I said, even down to layout, security, camera, and these all cost to kind of protect products and components and so on. So prevents errors causing waste of time and effort, and therefore saves costs. So if the more errors you prevent, the less waste you prevent, the more you're adding to the more waste you prevent, the the more you're adding to the bottom line. So quality, where are the bigger impacts of this in terms of quality? So having the right product according to specifications or requirements, that will have a speed, cost, and dependability. So you're consistently giving good stuff to your customer. And because you're giving good stuff and the quality is right and you're hitting the right, all your processes are efficient, then you've improved on the speed. So you have 3 impacts on those generic performance objectives by just looking at quality alone, for example. That's why in the I mentioned in the cornerstones, you can focus on 1 or 2 of them. You'd never try and go for all 4 cornerstones. You just couldn't. It would be too overwhelming, to say the least, let alone trying to differentiate or which one is actually giving us the maximum benefit. And that's the whole, it could be quality. And then you might find that, by observing your competitors, they're also getting a quality, they're catching up in the quality race. Therefore, you might focus on, let's now look back into our innovation, or let's look at our responsiveness. So, and you might identify that that's one of their weak points. Your competitors' weak points or the industry weak points is responsiveness. How can we do something that's far more efficient in terms of responsiveness to customers? So these are, you need to move around in those 4 cornerstones. So speed, again, has different interpretations. So I need to move because I need to finish out this. So if we look at speed here, so if we look at the short delivery lead time, it improves dependability and cost, because you don't have stuff hanging around. You're getting it to the customer a lot faster, and therefore they'll consume it faster, and therefore they'll repeat their orders and so on and so forth. So getting it out there, but it also beats your competitors. The faster you get it out there, reduce your lead times, you're compressing the order delivery time, total lead time. So improving any of these sequences in the supply chain, reducing, taking a half a day off there, or a couple of hours off there, 20 minutes off there, and so on and so forth. You're compressing the lead time. Therefore, you're improving speed. If you're getting it out, you're turning around, you're using your assets more efficiently, you're using your processes more efficiently. Therefore, you're reducing your costs. And that's reflected, again, DuPont's pyramids, for example, return on assets. You can also evaluate your effectiveness in terms of monetary terms on each of your processes, and find out which process has the biggest contribution towards reductions in costs, using the same return on assets ratios or techniques, and just apply them to processes. And then, of course, that leads to dependability. If we look at dependability here and what happens in this, so reliable deliveries, what does that improve? Cost, and also short speed time. So you're having, that's pretty self-explanatory. Reliable delivery, it'll reduce your costs because you have, why? Because, for example, you're using a transportation company, you've outsourced your transportation to a company. They have a rhythm. They know they have to come in, collect, and get out. So they've got their fixed schedules, pick up and drop off schedules, because you've improved your operations and you're dependable in terms of getting your product ready for collection and ready for delivery and so on. So, and that's reducing the lead time. So these guys can be there. They know they're not going to be hanging around. They're not wasting time, and they're not wasting, having engines and people walking around the place, engines ticking over, for example. Therefore, they're saving money. Everyone's a winner in every slight manner. And the flexibility, so frequent new products and services, a wide range, and the volume and delivery of changes impacts cost, dependability, and speed. Okay, and notice that these ones are focusing around speed, cost, dependability, and flexibility. These ones around here. The quality is the one that impacts all the rest. Neither flexibility, nor dependability, nor speed impacts on quality, interestingly, because it's a given. If you're doing these things right, then the quality is improved. Remember I talked about TQM, the total quality management. It's a concept. It's a mindset. Keep improving all these other areas and the quality improves. Therefore, you have more satisfied customers, and you go through the hoop all over again, and start improving because you have bigger demand and so on. You have to improve your efficiencies. So the 4 V's: volume, variety, and visibility. So the internal performance of an operations at quality, speed, and dependability. So cost affects those. I want to jump down to some of the examples down here. So one of the ways we use to represent these, if you look at this stage point of this a company, and they have technical services and they have production services, and sometimes we call these polar diagrams or spider diagrams, and all it is your XY graph with a couple of extra lines out of it in this case. Hence you have 5 lines. Now the way we read these is that 0 in the middle, and you might have 10 intervals. So from 0 to 10 out here, and 0 to 10 up here, and 0 to 10 out here, and 0 to 10, and so on. So you might set the target. This isn't the best example, but let's just say that for production services, you set the target of 9, and you can see, oh yeah, we've actually performed. We've hit the target there. But let's just say that in this case here, that for cost, bearing in mind this line around here is the production services, you might have set the target as 5, and what happens, you're coming in at 3, so you're falling short of the target. Now you'll see this a little bit more clear in one of the examples below. Actually, I'll move down to it. We'll compare a bus service and a taxi service. Okay, so a bus service, relatively low on cost. Dependability is going to be high. Why? Because they run on a schedule, a bus schedule. Speed is going to be low because it's the same, because they're working on a schedule. They'll have to be here, so they're not going to be half an hour early. I mean, what did they say? A German's favorite pastime is standing at the bus stop checking the watch to see that the bus arrives precisely on time according to the schedule. I hope there are no Germans in my class. Oh, anyway, flexibility. There is no flexibility in a bus. It's a predetermined route. And that's and end of quality. Yeah, it depends on who's providing the bus service and so on and so forth. But from a service point of view, it's not hugely important. Now, if we impose a taxi service on top of that, cost is not now. Viewing this from a customer's perspective, I should have qualified this to make it even more understandable. You're a customer. Which do you choose? What's important in terms of, for these companies, in terms of the performance objectives to meet, to satisfy me as a customer? So cost isn't an issue for me. Why? Because I know I'm going to be spending more money to get a taxi than I would do if I wanted a bus. But speed becomes important to me because I want to get there faster than the bus itself. So in other words, I can leave my job slightly later and not have to rush to a bus station and so on to get a route home. So speed could be of higher could be a higher performance objective for me as a customer. But the taxi service knows that, and they set that as a higher level. Quality, yeah, a little bit of luxury because there's only 1 or 2 people in the taxi, and flexibility, they can take any route. So it's a very high priority. So, and they can avoid delays and so on and so forth by taking various routes. Dependability is about this, a little bit less than the bus. Why? Because they don't always come precisely on time. That you're looking. Sometimes they already know the routes, and therefore they could come a little bit later. So dependability, or indeed the availability of the taxis when you want them. So it could be questionable from you in terms of dependability. So that's how we can compare 2 services, for example, within, and there's another one here. Yeah, this is used for a police force. So now, you see my point when I talk about how you can change these generic performance objectives to suit the industry or the business or the service that you're actually running. So in a police force, speed, dependability, and so on and so forth, they're out the window. It doesn't matter. Here's what are defined as the generic performance objectives. Crime reduction, crime detection, working with the criminal justice system, the courts, and so on, so forth. Efficiency and how we're doing things, responding to call 999s and so on, and reassurance. And this is the actual performance versus what was required. So when, what's your man's name? Chief of Police here in Ireland.
Drew Harris.
Yes, Drew Harris, the very man. He and his team of superintendents will sit down and said, right, these are the required performance over the next 12, 24 months. And now let's measure our actual performance. So you could see here, in terms of actual performance, they're up on the required performance for crime reduction. They're slightly down on reassurance and on the other objectives and crime detection. So they're not hitting their targets. Remember, as I said, 0 to 10, or it could be 100, whatever it is. So minimum, maximum on each of those axes along here. So this is what we expected to achieve, and this is what we actually, I should really pick two different colors, more obvious, but anyway, you get the idea. Actual performance. So it's a nice way of taking all of the data from all the different sources that created the indices and the information, piling it all together and compiling it into the overall objectives. This is why I'm talking about linking your strategic objectives to your actual operations data and process data inside your organization, the cascade effect. So what do we need to do to put in place to improve our efficiencies? We know we have a gap in our efficiencies here, or we have a gap in crime detection. It's ever so slight, but why are we not, why is our actual performance not hitting our target? We analyze the data, we find out what's happening. Should we have more resources? Do we need to change the process? Do we need to change some laws or something like that? Do we need better technology, more innovation? Do we need to get the guys up in Phoenix Park more up-to-date equipment, or improve their IT systems? Maybe their crime detections have moved because of more blue-collar crime. So therefore we need to up our cybercrime expertise, and that's how we can close this gap, because we're looking at the total crime detection as opposed to individual types of crime and so on and so forth. You could be up in one area, you could be up in Grand Theft Auto, it might be up, but cyber detection might be way down. So the overall performance, when you pull all these different departments, units and functions together, the overall performance is not meeting the expected or required performance. And here's just another way for a recycling service, general recycling versus a newspaper collection thing. You can interpret that for yourselves, but folks. But it's the same concepts, but we're going back to the generic performance objectives. That's it, folks. I don't know how you're feeling, but I'm freaking wiped out now tonight. Any question? Huh?
Could never have told, Mark.
Okay, any questions, comments, insults, jokes, even? Pick me up. In any case, just let me get out of things here. Get out of that, Mark, and get up there, and yeah. So a lot of information for you there. As I said, you'll need to probably delve and do a little bit more research around some of those models. You have the nuts and bolts of all you need to address those elements of the assignment in relation to the 4 V's and the generic performance objectives. So now you this will upset somebody, I'm quite sure. Now it's probably time to start roughing up your assignments and prepping and so on and so forth. That's why it's always important, you know, speed can be a killer. So if you're racing the stuff too early, you can find rework is a huge quality waste. So take your time until you have enough, and then plow into it and do it in with about a week or two to spare, kind of thing, but you have more and more information, as I said, that's directly relevant to your assignment in this case, anyway.
Mark, the main thing is the only relevant information I have for my assignment is 15%. I sent you the email there. That's grand. Cheers.
Lovely stuff. Fair play. And the other two guys, send me emails as well, will you?
That was 30 each, was it? Or 30 between the two of us?
Tell me, I'm just looking at numbers here. It was about 38, 37, 38 people. Have we lost a few people? I think we should be up around the 50, 52. Do we know if there's some people cried off at this stage or?
Probably
Some
the
people
snow.
are
No
trying to
idea
go
yet. No. Well, there was one other I suppose advice I'd give you as well. I assume at this stage you're already working in some kind of groups or teams and so on. Yeah, no. In any case, you should try and develop your study groups. So a handful of you, 5 or 6 or so, in groups as such, so as you can bounce ideas, different people, different backgrounds, and so on. That's how you function very well at this level of education, for sure. But it's only an input. Some people like to work groups, some people don't. But in any case, it makes life a lot easier when you do have. Do you remember the old program years ago, Paper Chase, where they used to all sit around inside the library studying and they'd all commit and this, that, same idea. And that's certainly how I got through my own further studies in, at master's level anyway, was, through having good study group, good mix of people as we had it. Anyway, it's just an input. It may or may not work for you as such, but should do. Anyway, folks, I'm going to call it a night, Wednesday, and I will see you when 2 weeks' time. I think it is next, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks,
Okay,
Mark.
folks.
Well,
Good
Thank
evening.
you.
Bye-bye.
Rightio.
Thanks, bye.
Cheerio,
Okay,
folks.
good night.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thanks,
Bye
mate.
bye.
Bye now.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.